You're listening to WNYC. It's Friday. Up next at 6:30, it's Marketplace. Tonight on the show, recent controversies over Target and Bud Light's Pride Month marketing have some in the LGBTQ community questioning true company values.
If it no longer seems profitable for them, they will show me who they really are, which is actually not an ally of my community.
That's on Marketplace. Coming up next on WNYC, we'll have more All Things Considered at 7 p.m. this evening. It's pretty nice outside right now, everybody. 67 degrees, mostly cloudy. That's assuming it's not raining where you are. Possible showers, thunderstorms tonight, small hail too. Otherwise, it'll stay quite nice. It's 6:30.
Support for WNYC comes from the Met. Now on view, Van Gogh's Cypresses reveals the story behind the artist's most iconic works. Museum admission is pay as you wish for New Yorkers. Learn more at metmuseum.org.
If you believe democracy requires a free press, your station is WNYC, 93.9 FM and AM 820, NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive. Progressive Commercial Insurance offers personalized rates and customizable coverages for your business vehicles. More at progressivecommercial.com.
How consumers are feeling about the economy, how the Fed is feeling about the economy, and can any of us actually make sense of what's going on in the economy? From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Amazon Business, helping provide a smarter, easier way to get the supplies businesses need to thrive. Amazon Business, your partner for smart business buying. And by Fidelity. A dedicated Fidelity advisor can help create a wealth plan for a full financial picture. Investment minimums apply. Fidelity Brokerage Services, LLC. And by Unisys, whose app modernization cloud solutions helps businesses create new cloud-native apps to unlock powerful insights and optimized performance. Unisys, keep breaking through.
In Washington, D.C., I'm Kimberly Adams in for Kai Risdall. It's Friday, the 16th of June. It's good to have you along, everyone. It was a busy week for economic news. The Federal Reserve met and held interest rates steady. Consumer sentiment numbers show people are starting to feel a bit better about how things are going. And the stock market is doing, well, pretty darn good. So what does all of this mean? We've got our experts on hand to help us sort it all out. Catherine Rampell at the Washington Post and Gina Smilik at the New York Times. Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. Happy Friday.
Thank you. Gina, I want to start with you. Are you team pause or team skip?
I am team, I really dislike this term debate we're having. Have we learned nothing about redefining terms in the English language from the transitory issues? So that is my team. I mean, so clearly the Fed decided not to raise interest rate this week, and we are all debating whether it's a pause, which apparently means that we're not raising rates imminently anytime in the near future, or a skip, which means that we're just going to go ahead and go in July. I feel like those words are synonymous. They kind of mean the same the same thing, but the underlying debate is a real one. Like, how long is the Fed going to hold off on raising rates? I think we got a pretty clear signal this week that they're at least thinking about raising rates in July. Chair Powell said at his press conference following the decision that July is going to be a live meeting. So it seems pretty obvious that we're all focusing our eyes pretty intently on that month for the next Fed rate move.
Just to back up a little bit, Catherine, why this pause/skip right now?
I think the idea is we've seen some fragility in the economy, right? In financial markets, a few months ago, we had a couple of bank failures, and monetary policy works with long and variable lags, as the saying goes. So Fed officials figure, with inflation moderating and some potential vulnerabilities in the economy that we don't quite have our heads around yet, it might make sense to just let things sink in and then potentially raise rates. And to the point that Gina was making just now about what happens in July, if you look at the Fed's own forecasts, they predict that rates will continue rising, that they are not done with rate hikes yet. I mean, if you look at their forecasts for where rates will end up later this year, for example. And markets seem to believe that. If you look at market forecasts, where markets are pricing in rates, they are anticipating a likely rate hike in July. But, the numbers have come in such erratic and confusing ways that I think the conversation we're having may be completely different by the next time that they meet, because we'll have new numbers in.
Gina, Catherine was just talking about the vulnerabilities that kind of make it hard to see where things are going next. What are some of those vulnerabilities specifically?
Yeah, so I think the big one is the financial sector vulnerabilities. We obviously saw several banks earlier this year, Silicon Valley Bank most famously, just absolutely collapse under the weight of Fed rate increases. And so I think the question is, A, is there more to come there? And B, is the bank turmoil that we've already seen going to slow down lending in the economy, which will translate into slower spending and cool down the economy as a whole, basically doing some of the Fed's work for it. So that's vulnerability number one. I think vulnerability number two is just this reality that it takes a long time for Fed rate moves to have their full effect. And so even though we know that the Fed has raised rates to a little bit over 5%, we're probably not feeling the full impact of all of those moves yet. And so the question is just, are we about to get walloped by a big slowdown that just hasn't arrived yet? Or is this sort of the slowdown that we're going to see? And I think they're just trying to buy themselves a little bit of time to see how that story plays out.
Sort of being on pins and needles about whether or not we're going to get walloped in this economy. Catherine, I feel like we've been predicting this recession for ages, and the American consumer seems to be ignoring it completely.
Well, again, the data are confusing. So yes, the consumer sentiment numbers, which is what I think you're referring to, look quite good lately. But there has been a slowdown in consumer spending. Lots of other softer measures, surveys about how people feel about the economy, whether they think we're in a recession, et cetera. They're still not great. So I think that there's mixed sentiment out there, and I wouldn't read too much into any one particular indicator, again, because so many of them seem to be at odds. To the question of to what extent is this about consumers or businesses? I think there's another vulnerability that Gina was probably hinting at there. What happens with commercial real estate? It's not just the banks. It's not just the consumers. There's also this entire sector that is very sensitive to these rate hikes, and we haven't seen the full consequences there either. So there are many moving parts in this economy that are affected by these rate hikes, and just because one indicator suggests that consumers may be a little bit more optimistic than they had been, I think doesn't necessarily mean we're out of the woods.
All of these mixed signals may be, I'm guessing, why we did not hear any talk of a soft landing this week from the Fed. Although I guess at this point we're afraid to use any terms too confidently, right, Gina?
Well, it's so funny because when Chair Powell got asked about the possibility of soft landing, he said, it might still be possible, but really the number one priority right now is wrestling inflation down. This is going to matter for generations of Americans, and it is the biggest job, which I thought was really interesting because if you look at the Fed's actual forecasts, like what the members of the Federal Open Market Committee and their colleagues wrote down on paper and submitted at this meeting, it was a very soft landing-ish set of projections. They put forward this series of estimates where you really saw inflation just coming down, sort of miraculously over time. You saw unemployment moving up, but really just a little bit. And you saw growth really sort of stabilizing at a pretty steady level, not sort of falling to the very low levels they had previously predicted. And so I thought that was really interesting. There did seem to be some sort of disconnect there. It could be mostly a timing issue, but I thought it was also sort of notable. And I think there's a little more explaining there to be done at future Fed meetings.
Catherine, real quick before we go, as muddy as the picture is here in the U.S., it's even more so when you zoom out to the global economy. China cut interest rates, we paused, Eurozone increased rates. What is the actual story of the global economy in this moment?
Oh, I wish I had a concise answer for you. I don't know, I think is the answer. Europe is facing a different set of pressures than we are. Like, there is not one single global economy, right? There are different factors and variables that are affecting Europe, which is still dealing, for example, with the consequences of Russia's unprovoked invasion of Ukraine. They're dealing with some other, climate-related things that have disrupted various kinds of markets. China has a bunch of idiosyncratic things going on there too. So it's very hard to say. Obviously, all these different economies are linked. And if Europe is in trouble, that's not going to be great for the United States. But we seem to be on somewhat divergent paths right now.
Makes sense. Catherine Rampell at The Washington Post and Gina Smilik at The New York Times. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Wall Street today a bit lower, but still pretty strong week. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. Well, now that we've talked about the week that was, let's go back to those banking crises we were just talking about, where the casualties included Silicon Valley Bank, Signature Bank, and First Republic, which have mostly been absorbed by other larger lenders at this point. Marketplace's Lily Jamali checks in on the regional banks that are still standing and the challenges they face.
The bank runs of this spring that started with the failure of SVB have stabilized, says Alexei Savov, a finance professor at NYU Stern.
So now it's a little bit more of a trickle, which is easier for banks to deal with.
But they're still hurting. The stock prices of PacWest, Zions, and Fifth Third are way down since March. There remains a difference between what bank assets are worth on paper and what they're actually worth. One recent study estimates there are $2 trillion of those unrealized losses, the kind that brought down SVB. In this climate, the University of Alabama's Julie Hill says regional banks are operating under more scrutiny from the government.
We saw Joe Biden from the White House telling the American people that they were going to get to the bottom of the regulatory failures that happened that resulted in these banks' failures.
She says regulators heard that message loud and clear. Meanwhile, the survivors among regional banks have tried to manage the Federal Reserve's higher interest rates, which triggered the crisis in the first place. Dan Suzuki is Deputy Chief Investment Officer at Richard Bernstein Advisors.
Banks have been able to delay the pain by not passing on higher short-term interest rates that we've seen as a result of Fed policy to their customers' deposits.
But competition for deposits, that's your money, is starting to heat up.
And the regional banks are under a lot of pressure now to raise their deposit rates in order to retain their customers' assets.
That has the potential to hit regional bank profits, but it's a potential opportunity for consumers, says Mayra Rodriguez Valladares, managing principal at MRV Associates.
They should be looking to see who offers more for regular checking, for savings, for certificates of deposit, because otherwise those depositors can walk.
When it comes to the return on your money, she says, right now is a good time to shop around. I'm Lily Jamali for Marketplace.
The athletic brand Adidas announced earlier this month it's going to help its U.S. employees with student loans pay back their debt. This kind of program isn't new, but it also isn't common. Only about 8% of employers in the country offer the benefit, according to a survey out this week from the Human Resources Association, SHRM. As Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes reports, with student loan payments set to resume in October, more companies may be adding the perk.
There are approximately 43 million people in the U.S. with federal student loan debt, and they want to know which employers will help them pay it off.
More and more frequently, I'm hearing from borrowers who are asking me if there's a list.
Betsy Mayotte is president of the Institute of Student Loan Advisors. There's no official list of employers, but those who do offer some sort of benefit see it as part of competing for talent in a tight job market. Michael Getlin is vice president of Global Total Rewards for the exercise company Peloton, which, like Adidas, offers employees $100 a month towards student debt. He says Peloton's had the benefit since 2017.
Anything that could weigh on a team member is important to us, and this is a very significant part of that for a large portion of our workforce.
As an alternative to helping pay down debt, Peloton offers employees with dependents who might someday go to college the same amount of money towards educational savings. Craig Copeland with the Employee Benefit Research Institute says he's heard from some companies that offering benefits related to student debt, as opposed to the cash equivalent, led to better staff retention.
Because it kind of anchored them to, I'm getting this money to do something very specific, pay back the student loan, where if I just give them money, then people don't tie it to either the employer or to paying off the debt.
But not every worker has student debt, and some have other priorities, points out Emily M. Dickens with the HR Trade Association SHRM.
We've heard that cash is one of those things that people care about, and flexibility is number 2.
While employers might not offer actual money to pay off loans, Betsy Mayotte at the Institute of Student Loan Advisors notes there are other ways to help employees, like offering counseling on how to better manage debt.
Employers are a trusted voice for most of their employees, so it's a really effective communication channel.
And it's one we're in front of pretty much all the time. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
Coming up, it's never dull, that's for sure. Gotta keep it interesting, but first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average lost 108 points, 0.3%, to close at 34,299. The Nasdaq slid 93 points, 0.7%, to finish at 13,689. And the S&P 500 dropped 16 points, 0.4%, to end at 4409. For the week, the Dow gained 1.2%, the Nasdaq climbed 3.2%, and the S&P 500 jumped 2.6%. Stephanie Hughes just talked about how some companies are helping their workers pay down student loan debt, including Adidas. Its stock fell 0.6%, and Peloton sank 3.6%. Also on that list, EdTech company Chegg tumbled 4.1%, and Google parent company Alphabet ticked down 1.2%. Bonds fell, the yield on the 10-year T-note rose to 3.76%, and you're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Invest Puerto Rico. More than a tropical paradise, the island is a fast-growing hub for innovators with world-class talent and a thriving entrepreneurial ecosystem. More at investpr.org today. Game changers, welcome home. And by JLL, focusing on uncovering insights to identify strategic locations for where to break new ground in commercial real estate. JLL.com. See a brighter way. And by Charles Schwab. The people at Schwab are passionate about helping investors. Learn more at schwab.com/whyschwab.
WNYC is supported by Swan Galleries with an auction of maps and atlases, natural history, and color plate books on June 22nd, including early atlases and globes, botanical prints, and more. More at swangalleries.com and on the Swan Galleries app.
On June 19, 1865, roughly 250,000 enslaved people in Texas officially learned that they were free. This day became known as Juneteenth. I'm Kai Wright, and Notes from America will be live in Houston this Sunday for a special celebrating Juneteenth with locals who helped create the holiday and are working hard to preserve its relevance. Sunday evening at 6 on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. In the 7 o'clock hour of All Things Considered, Monday, the elephant rescued from a zoo in Puerto Rico a month ago is adjusting to life in a new refuge. She's already made 2 elephant friends. We'll hear that and more at 7 o'clock. Stay with us.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kimberly Adams. For a decade or so, it's been pretty common for big companies to show support for LGBTQ plus customers, or support for their dollars and brand loyalty, in June, Pride Month. But this year's different. Those campaigns are drawing backlash, even customer boycotts. Target pulled certain products from its Pride collection, citing confrontational behavior by shoppers and danger to its employees. Bud Light walked back its brief collaboration with a transgender influencer, and this week lost its status as the country's top-selling beer. But the appearance of caving to homophobia and transphobia has consequences too. Marketplace's Savannah Marr reports.
The marketing team at Bud Light sometimes sends personalized beer cans to popular social media influencers in hopes they'll use those cans in promotional content. Pretty good deal, right? Until this 1-minute video sparked calls for a boycott.
Hi! Impressive carrying skills, right? I got some Bud Lights for us.
Dylan Mulvaney posted it back in April. She's a transgender TikTok star with over 10 million followers. To be clear, we're talking about garden variety corporate social media marketing. But Bud Light just doing business with a trans person was enough to trigger a violent reaction.
So when Kid Rock took out an automatic weapon and shot up a case of beer, you did not see anyone from Anheuser-Busch saying, hey, this isn't okay.
Mark Robertson was watching this play out from Chicago, where he co-owns 4 LGBTQ bars that used to serve a lot of Anheuser-Busch products, until the company's CEO issued a statement saying it, quote, never intended to be part of a discussion that divides people.
Having a brand that was so enveloped in the hate and not condemning the hate is not something that we would feel comfortable having in our spaces.
Robertson's bars no longer serve Bud Light, Busch Light, or another Anheuser-Busch beer, Goose Island.
They were a major part of our marketing. We spent thousands of dollars redoing menus and signage and things like that to completely remove them from the premises.
For as long as companies have been marketing to LGBTQ people, and they've been doing it for decades, by the way, those companies have been getting flack for it.
I had received hate mail. I was called all kinds of names. We had boycott petitions.
Tim Bennett was the brains behind Subaru's 15-year campaign marketing its cars to LGBTQ people. Emphasis on the L. In the 90s, he says the company realized its cars were organically popular with lesbians. So it started making ads that spoke directly to them.
There's one probably you saw that said different drivers, different roads, one car. If you were LGBTQ and you looked a little closer, you saw that there was a license plate that said Xena Lover.
As in Xena Warrior Princess, the 90s TV show.
And Xena was a huge icon, particularly with lesbians.
Sort of, if you know, kind of targeted advertising. When the hate mail rolled in, Bennett says Subaru stayed the course.
What I used to always say at Subaru was we sell our products to a smart, educated consumer that celebrates diversity. And just leave it at that.
He says you can't please everyone, and companies facing transphobic backlash now would do well to remember why they were engaging in inclusive advertising to begin with, to sell stuff. Joanna Schwartz, who teaches LGBTQ marketing at Georgia College and State University, says consumers will remember this moment.
As a company, when this happened, did you stand up for people, or did you pull back and try to minimize the fact that this is a group that you care about?
Schwartz says pulling back support is short-sighted, especially as polling finds 1 in 5 Gen Z adults identifies as LGBT.
And those are the consumers that you want to make sure that you satisfy, right?
Consumers like Ashley Welch. They're 26. They live in Seattle.
I very, very much care where my dollar is going.
They care deeply about transgender rights and see companies walking back trans-inclusive products and campaigns as caving to the demands of a hate movement.
If it no longer seems profitable for them, they will show me who they really are, which is actually not an ally of my community.
Welch was never much of a Bud Light drinker to begin with, more of a hard seltzer person. But they say they'll definitely be spending less money at Target now. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.
If you've been keeping up with U.S. trade news for the past 5 years, first of all, kudos to you. Secondly, you'd know that the tariffs former President Trump put on many imports back in 2018 are still in place. So what has this meant for U.S. distributors? We checked in with Gretchen Blau, our customs brokerage manager in Erie, Pennsylvania.
Everyone kind of expected when President Biden came into office that the China tariffs would go away, the 301 tariffs, the 232 tariffs for steel and aluminum would go away, but everything's still in place. For the 232 tariffs, we now actually have some additional requirements where we need to put the country of smelt in addition to the country of origin there. Country of smelt is where the steel was actually made, not just the product was made. Importers need to provide the mill certificates. They need to get those from the supplier, and then we add that information in on the entry now. So that makes things a little bit more interesting. There's more anti-dumping and countervailing investigations to add more tariffs to commodities. One of the new ones that's come up is for paper shopping bags, which is kind of interesting considering that everyone's going to the reusable bags, at least in our area. Anti-dumping basically is when a company sells to an importer here in the United States at a really, really low price, lower than maybe a U.S. manufacturer can even produce the commodity in order to basically take over the market. So this additional tariffs on everything, the additional duties on everything gives the U.S. manufacturers a more level playing field so that the landed cost goes up on these imported goods, and therefore the U.S. manufacturer is able to better compete with them. People are looking at their sourcing choices, or should be looking at their sourcing choices because of this. We're seeing new opportunities every day. We're opening new offices here and abroad to cover everything for our customers. It's never dull, that's for sure. And we're learning new things every day to help our customers out.
That's Gretchen Blau, mining the ports out of Erie, Pennsylvania. This final note on the way out today, Savannah was talking earlier about the cost of the backlash for companies that take a stand on social justice issues. Axios tallied up those losses based on how Target, Anheuser-Busch, and Kohl's stocks have been doing, and figures they've lost a collective $28.7 billion in market value since April. Now, whether that's due to the backlash or backlash to company responses to the backlash, hard to say.
Marketplace is supported by Progressive Insurance. The Name Your Price tool provides a range of coverage options. Progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law. And by Extend, turning credit cards into spend management tools so businesses can control payments with virtual cards. More at paywithextend.com.
Here's your moment of economic context. 97% of unionized workers at UPS voted today to go on strike if the company and the Teamsters Union can't reach a deal by August. Some numbers from this from the Associated Press. The Teamsters represent about 340,000 UPS workers, and the company delivers about 25 million packages a day, which, according to UPS, ends up being the equivalent to about 6% of the nation's GDP. Our theme music was composed by BJ Liederman. Marketplace's executive producer is Nancy Fargali. Donna Tam is the executive editor. Neil Scarborough is the vice president and general manager. And I'm Kimberly Adams. We'll see you Monday, everyone.
This is APM.
WNYC supporters include Bill. Bill automates financial operations